process. Additionally, the TSCC holds public budget hearings like this one to engage with district leadership and provide additional opportunity for public comment before budget adoption. I'll now ask my fellow commissioners and the staff to introduce themselves and state if they have any business relationships that could be construed as a conflict of interest. I'll get there. I've had a lot of hearings this week.
I can start. I can start. Good morning, everyone. I'm James Ofsning-Keyham. I'm Vice Chair of the Tax Supervising and Conservation Commission. This is my 8th and final year. I was just speaking with Director Robin Hottel about. When I'm not here, I work for OHSU in IT, and I don't have any business.
Also in the 8-year class with James, we're term limited, so this will be our last opportunity to speak with you and learn more about the port with the port.
Good morning. My name is Mark Wibble. This is my 6th year with the TSCC, and so I'll be back. And I always enjoy coming at large. And when I did work, I was a senior policy analyst at Portland State in the president's office, and I have no business relations with the port, although I am Port of Portland.
Good morning. Thank you all for being here, and thank you for your service. Antoinette Chandler, and I serve as the Chief Financial Officer for the port.
Okay. We'll start with some introductory remarks from the port, after which we'll provide an option for public comment, and then we'll ask our questions and discuss the budget with you. I think we're also going to leave space for public comment at the end, just in case someone saw the public notice in the Oregonian.
It's interesting. James and I were talking about the length of time, and interestingly, the annual visit has you thinking again, oh, it's time again. And it's actually really good for us to have to articulate on an annual basis externally how we're thinking about our budget. And so it's always a pleasure for us to see you all here. I think James is remembering that I think my very first commission meeting was a presentation to the TSCC, and what I'll do is ask you to ride herd over
Yes.
for your questions. We have different executive team members to present, so go for it, Antoinette.
That's what I wanted to do. So again, if you all remember the format that we've had over the past couple of years, I think that worked well. We engaged in, I think, a very robust conversation, and we look forward to doing that again. We do have other executive team members, so if I could just allow them to introduce themselves before we get started with the line of questioning, I think that would be warranted. So I'm going to start with our general counsel and maybe have us work our way to the other side of the room.
Good morning. I'm Dan Blofis, the General Counsel. I also, for another few days, have the Lower Willamette program as part of my portfolio.
Good morning. I'm Keith Levitt, and I'm the Chief Trade and Equitable Development Officer at the Port.
Sir.
Hi, I'm Vince Granado. I'm the Chief Projects Officer responsible for the Terminal Core project.
I'm Stan Waters, the Chief Project Delivery and Safety Officer.
And good morning, Dan Pippinger. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for the port.
Great. Okay.
So I'll now call on any members of the public who would like to speak. Each person is limited to 3 minutes, and we'll let you know when you're nearing the end of it. We'll check in after our discussion before we certify. So with that, we will, I think, dive into our questions, and Mark has the first one.
So I live in Northeast Portland, near the 42nd Avenue PCC project, which is a mass timber project. And so it was exciting for me to watch that go up and to see your mass timber partnership project. And that was awarded for the campus at Terminal 2. What are the first projects that will benefit from these grant dollars? And when will the community start to see some of the benefits of those dollars?
I see all eyes looking at me right now, so I'll go ahead, Trade and Equitable Development Officer. And it is interesting that you come on an annual basis because you get to hear the progress that we're making on some of these really transformational project pieces. So, a year ago, we were talking a lot about winning a federal grant, and that process is well underway. We are in the middle of master planning the innovation and really connecting both of those things. The two major components that go directly to the Port of Portland from a grant standpoint are, one, make the terminal itself site development ready for manufacturing process. So you can imagine that terminal's ready for the kind of manufacturing that we envision. It's in, with Cascadia and with building code changes, we need to do a lot of subduction type work. And so there's a project that goes literally into the soils and creates greater structural integrity work. We do have a grant also within the family of grants that is focused on workforce development, and that's about $4 million. Our staff is the recipient of the grant. We work very closely with Work Systems, Inc. in the region here with Portland Community College to bring essentially new job in factory-built housing, which is a new thing here, a very emerging sector, a big part of the solution to all of the components of the solution for housing. We have two tenants currently going on at the terminal. One is Hacienda CDC, and I'm sure we had probably talked about the prototyping. So part of this innovation from a state grant was to do prototyping work, houses into fire-ravaged communities around the state. Particularly, there's some great articles out there on the Lincoln City project for a couple that lost their home during the 2020 wildfires and delivery of a house that came from Terminal 2. We will learn as these prototype projects continue to go. We'll learn about the climate. They will be put in different parts of Oregon. And as we learn more about working with Hacienda, with other partners, to build a factory at Terminal 2 that is pumping out a high volume of housing into the market. There is one last thing I'll just mention here. Also, on the factory side of this is another tenant called Madami. They are now within one of the warehouses at Terminal 2, and they are also going to build factory-built housing. It will be more traditional factory-built housing, but we're also working directly with a developer that will, next year, you will be hearing about many, many homes that are being put out of that factory and sent again around the state with a particular focus on the middle band of housing within the state for what they call workforce housing that is affordable to people that live in those communities. I'll stop there and answer any other questions.
This is a subject I could talk on forever.
So could I.
Yeah. Trees that get taken down. Where is this? Because we're not cutting old growth or anything like that. Okay.
Yeah, and I would say, so the sourcing issue that we are envisioning is very similar to what we just did with the roof at PDX, where you're able to track and trace. You're working with small woodlot owners. Ideally, part of this EDA grant is for the Oregon Department of Forestry to build a track and trace program, working with Sustainable Northwest and other partners to make sure that as we ramp up this industry sector, it's done in a highly sustainable way. So that's all part of the big vision that we have here.
Dr. Wolbold and I both come out of higher education, and it sounded like piece for us. It seems like an interesting situation because the port is kind of helping with the workforce development side, the education side, but then is also potentially, an employer. And I just kind of wondered if you could give me a little bit better picture for you said there was one grant that was $4 million, I think, but is there additional money allocated to the workforce development? And for whatever kind of that total pie is on workforce development, do you have a target for kind of how many graduates or people that you're getting through that?
We can provide follow-up detail on the grant itself. So one thing to remember, we were one party among several that included Oregon State, University of Oregon, Oregon Department of Forestry, Department of Land Conservation and Development, and Business Oregon that participated as the Oregon Mass Timber Coalition that went for the grant. We won $40+ million, and most of the dollars, while we got a pretty good chunk that went to the infrastructure of Terminal 2, a lot of the dollars went to the universities for research and development. The U of O's piece of this is around design and around the acoustics piece. So they do a lot. They need a center that they will build at Terminal 2 that they got grant funding through that EDA process to build this R&D around acoustics testing. Oregon State does a lot of testing around fire testing and all of that, and they do that down at the campus at Oregon State. So there's a strong linkage between the research and development arms of the universities and then all the way down to the workforce development side of the people that we want to have come to work in these factories, and the kind of the training that goes back and forth is going to be a rich opportunity for us to bring quality jobs into the community.
Thank you. Oh, I guess I have the next question too. So the port received $72 million in ARPA funds for use at PDX, and since receiving the funds, we see the port has drawn down about $25 million, most of it in fiscal year 22. We wondered if you could provide an update on the airline industry and travel recovery for us, and if you think that when you think the additional money will be drawn down and what it will be used for. We see budgets for 35 districts, I think, and 12 hearings, and it's pretty unusual. I mean, you're in a class by yourself of not kind of pulling down as much of the money as possible as early as possible. So we're interested to just get an update on it.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you for the question, James. If we just look what's happening nationally, the employment recovery is hovering somewhere around 90 to 92%. And if I look at that time frame up through calendar year 22, that's primarily focused on the national domestic. And you may recall last year we budgeted our employment activity to come in somewhere around 7.8 million, and it looks like we're pretty much going to hit that target in terms of employments. Now, if we think about where we're headed in terms of fiscal 24, we're being conservative in coming in at around 8.5%. So we're still about 15% off of our 2019 levels. And just to kind of frame some context, and just as a reminder, since we've been through 3 years of COVID, and I think it's safe to say we're officially out of COVID, sort of. If you think about where we were in June of 2020, our activity was down almost 95%. So it was pretty drastic. And so the fact that we did have access to federal stimulus money definitely helped us, I think, in 3 ways. And we'll continue to use the money in this way just to make sure that we were covered in terms of any potential debt service. Certainly expenses, as there was some revenue loss, particularly, I would say, primarily with our parking revenue and just that activity. So the stimulus money was very helpful in that regard. And so on a go-forward basis, we're still focused on those 2 areas, just making sure that we preserve liquidity. We're still thinking through what this economy is going to look like as we come into fiscal 24. So I think just to be conservative, we want to make sure that we're continuing to be very thoughtful about the preservation of that money. To your point, we did draw down the 25. This year, we had anticipated, if you remember last year's conversation, that we would draw down about 30. We haven't had to drop down that much this year, and that's actually a good thing, because that means that again, the activity is back up, and we're seeing the fruits of that. So the other thing that we're thinking about and contemplating is just again looking at our debt portfolio, and there may be an opportunity for us to consider being a little more proactive and aggressive in paying down some debt. But again, all of this we're just evaluating and doing that kind of forward looking, thinking about if we may have some additional dips in the economy and that how that may impact us. In terms of the going back to the original question around the climate and the airline industry, we really see kind of it. I would say it was almost like a tale of two cities in terms of the business travel, in terms of the leisure travel. We have seen the leisure travel come back pretty significantly for us, at least in terms of where we're landing, finishing up this year. Business travel is still continuing to lag, and I would say across the country, again, nationally, I think business travel is about 80%, somewhere thereabouts. And so we're kind of hovering in that category as well. So that is really the speed of which we come back is definitely going to be contingent upon how quickly some of that business travel continues to recover. The last comment that I'll make is, all in all, what we're anticipating, still forecasting that we'll be back to 2019 levels, hopefully around fiscal 25, maybe even a little bit of fiscal 26. And that's been consistent what we've messaged to our investor community whenever we're going out to issue debt.
Thank you so much. Could you give a little bit, just so it's clear in my mind, what's the breakdown or your expected, historic breakdown between leisure and business travel?
Yeah, that has been, I'm going to ask Dan. You could respond to that.
Yeah, I don't know the number specifically, but we have a heavy business travel, right? That's I don't want to give you a number that I'm not sure of, but
Sure.
proportionally, we tend to rely more on business travel than some other destinations, right? You can imagine southern destinations in particular, or theme parks or big cities have a lot more leisure travel. We are pretty reliant on the business travel here, and that when Antoinette talked about that, I'll just mention the north-south business travel in the tech industry is one big indicator that has not come back. The other one is Asia travel, really with a kind of not fully opening of China in particular, but also just general business travel overseas to Asia, whereas we've seen it come back robustly to Europe. So those are the areas that business travel is lagging for us.
Thanks. Maybe I should do that. Thank you. I guess my last follow-up on this, which I think that kind of leads into, is the port projecting that that business travel will all return, or do you think some of the kind of changes in the way that we work, or that the port customers work, those changes are permanent?
I'll look to Antoinette for the numbers here, but we think we'll get back to 100% of pre-pandemic in 2 years. So we're not highly optimistic that it recovers quickly. One of our baseline assumptions is that business will not come back in the same way, but that will be exceeded by business leisure travel, sort of combined trips and leisure. And that's a trend we're seeing in a lot of markets. And I think, as we've talked about before, as Dan referenced, the business class travel drives a lot of the airline decisions about route selection, because the front of the plane, so business and first class tickets, pay such a disproportionate share. And that's part of why we haven't seen a return of Asia travel yet. While there may be leisure travel there, you really need the front seats to be filled to make that long, we call them long, thin routes, really long, not a really big plane, but the front of the plane really drives those choices. So we're not sure what that looks like. We're not highly optimistic that it'll be fast, and we'll just see how it shakes out. Because those are not our decisions, we're kind of trying to navigate with the airlines. They are bullish about Portland and continue to be excited about the construction work and investing here, but it's not back yet. And some of that, I know we have talked about, is our nature as an origination destination airport. We're not a hub. So the hubs are mostly back around the country. These more isolated, the ends of the spokes like we are still not back in most cases, with the exception, as Dan referenced, in the sun markets.
One of the benefits of being a long-serving commissioner, in addition to remembering Mr. Robinette's first appearance before us in a suit and tie and wingtips, and now we see no tie and his red bands. In addition to all that, we also have a chance, or I've also had a chance to see things come from we're thinking about to a policy to suddenly seeing a little bit of this implementation show up in the budget to now getting to a point where it's in practice and we want to talk about how it's going. And probably very representative of that is the Regional Prosperity Initiative. We've talked with you about that several times, I think at least for 4 years. And so we were actually hoping maybe to hear from some of the port commissioners about how that policy to practice to evaluation is going, but we'll take whoever wants to talk to us about that. On a practical level, what are the activities that are going on in this Regional Prosperity Initiative? How are they working? How do you know they're working? What have you set to the side because it just hasn't worked as you thought? And what are you going gangbusters on?
Yeah, it's a great question. And we have two commissioners here. I'll go for an answer, and then they can maybe wave the flag if I screw it up. And I appreciate James and I had a little brief conversation at the outset because it has been quite a journey. It's been 5 or 6 years when we were really thinking about our DEI efforts and what they meant. But both the pandemic and the murder of George Floyd had us thinking more aggressively about what's our role in the community, what are we here for? And that has really, for us, been a shift away from the things we operate to the people we serve. And that includes our employees and our business partners, people, but our neighbors and our broader community. It's been really exciting. I do appreciate you saying that you're seeing those pieces. I was thinking of it sitting here and looking up. We have a new mission, and it's up there about building shared prosperity for the region through travel, trade, and economic development. It's rethinking what we're for. And that shift, and I'll get to a few specific examples, I'd say for the commission, and they have been very supportive, I would say more than supportive, they've been driving us to think harder about how do you spend contract dollars, who gets employed, what do your projects do? You heard Keith reference it. I think he might have done it inadvertently, but that's the whole idea at Terminal 2 is how do we use our position as a landlord to leverage into more impact in the community? And it's really exciting. We don't know the answers, though, right? We're pushing down the path to see where it takes us. I will note, and then I'll get to the examples, it has also helped us on recruitment. We have been getting really high-quality people. I'll use Antoinette as an example. Because we're asking these questions and putting our mission to work to say, what does this mean in everything we do, whether it's a financial equity tool that Antoinette and her team are using, or it's our properties team going to say, who benefits from this project? It's an exciting time. So the commission has asked in particular around structurally what we're doing, which a lot of that comes back to me. How are we thinking about the organization structure? We did create a couple years ago a shared prosperity office. We've hired someone specifically. She's sick today, sadly, but Myra Areola is running that for us. We're bulking that up organizationally to be a service provider internally, to have functions, not just diversity, equity, and inclusion, but also community engagement, HR, because of the component that is about people, contracts and procurement, and our small business program, because that's how a lot of our impact is felt. It's through the contracts we let and that you see commission approve. So we have done that July 1st. We are consolidating some of those business lines and service provision so that internally there are clear lines about who is business line and who is service provision, and how do you have shared prosperity be more broadly felt. And the commission has really asked for accountability there. How do you keep track of that? How do you know that those are being delivered? Myra's team is also working through the global DEI benchmarks, the GDEIBs, to help us tag to globally recognized measures and work with each division toward those measurements. And so we understand where we are in in an objective frame. You might have seen one of the projects that was approved. It was an architecture spend earlier today from the commission. Terminal core is another one where we're really looking at where's the wood coming from? Who's doing the work on site? How do we bring in more communities of color into the workforce and have more women and people of color in management jobs? So what is our role there? Sort of putting our thumb on the scale in the right way. That has been very exciting. So we actually have specifically a terminal core technical assistance program that is especially designed to help contractors get into the work on site. It's the first time we've done something like that. We've spent about $180,000 on that and have another 150 to go in that bucket. But it is similar to our mentor protege program. We have 11 more mentees graduating this month. And we've had, I believe it's 300 contracts let into former mentees. And I do have a number here somewhere, $117 million worth of our own contracts to mentees who have come through the program for small businesses. So we are having some very direct, specific impacts, also thinking organizationally about how we're structured to deliver. And I would say our executive team and our employees are pretty excited about what comes next and trying to figure out, is this consistent with our mission? Is this aligned? And it's fun and interesting. And as I said at the beginning of our session to James, it's also tough sometimes because we don't know what the answer is. It's a little more complicated than just running a big airport, right? It's more, who all do you touch in that space? So it's really interesting and fun.
And I guess if you do have board members here, I would invite you, if you have something you'd like to say about, as commissioners for the port, seeing something move from policy to practice, how do you make your judgment that this is the path for us, or, you know, I'm uncertain, or I would like to see it push a little more this way and less that way? How do you feel about it?
Good morning. My name's Katie Koba, and I'm one of the newest commissioners on the port, having been here not quite a year. So I don't even have as much history as you all do in terms of the detail. What I can share with you is the very robust discussions that we have as commissioners in engaging with the staff on all of these topics. And Curtis is absolutely right. We're 100% committed to the new mission and shared prosperity. And frankly, as we all know, you need to demonstrate that for your employees to truly buy in and move it forward. And I was able to attend an all-employee staff meeting yesterday where Curtis and his team were talking about all of the initiatives that are happening within the organization, which, having served in state government for 37 and a half years, knowing the importance of the staff and their ability to understand and articulate and then carry it out in their day-to-day work. So I can't give you a specific project. This is what we talked about. This is through to fruition, other than to say probably one of the most visible that's gotten the most recent press lately is the awards to the contractees in the new terminal. And the process that the port went through, which was I think for them, for staff, very challenging, but it was all about how are we going to go out and get locally owned, minority owned, women owned companies, whether it's retail or food, and really reaching out to them to say, we think you can do this. There's an interest from our customers in having you in the airport. How can we work with you side by side to get you to go through the process, which is very painful, and ultimately come out the other end? And I think people are so excited about the awards of the retailers and the new food establishments. We're all ready for the new airport to open tomorrow. So it's what I can share with you is it's not made up and it's not just talk. It's really happening, and it's very rewarding and exciting for all of us.
Thank you.
So I have a little follow-up. So when I was at Portland State, we were always thrilled when one of our food carts became a brick and mortar business.
Yeah.
And when you talk about your mentoring program, you're mentoring businesses into your concourse, and then have you had that experience where they go from being, in the concourse to be blowing up and becoming a much bigger and more successful and employing more people kind of business?
Yeah, it's a really good question. It's a hard environment to work in. And so it's been really interesting for us to see how some succeed and some do not. We had a sort of a pilot program out there that was sort of a food cart-esque in what was the Oregon market. And I'm going to ask Vince, I'm going to put you on notice so you can speak to it. Vince's team, in conjunction with Dan and his team, have been working on how do we help more concessionaires get in, as Commissioner Koba mentioned, and what does that mean? And we do have a sort of a food cart thinking going on, but some, for example, Bambuza, Vietnamese restaurant in the airport, they were able to, it was not their first site, but it was their first airport site, and they were able to enter and are still in the airport, actually 2 sites at PDX, but to leverage that into, I believe, 12 or 13 sites in other airports. They've really grown because they learned how to do it's a smaller menu usually. It's speedier, oftentimes fewer items or ingredients for example, if you get chicken pho, it will have 3 fewer ingredients in it because it's got to be faster and easier, right? Others, like a very well-known, not to be named, wing shop from Portland, we had out as a cart, and they just couldn't do it. One, no one wanted to buy $14 chicken wings from Pok Pok. And they couldn't pull it off. And so we've had some successes and some failures. Vince, do you want to speak to or do I want Dan to speak to it? Dan, it's your concessions team. We're in the handoff. You're kind of witness here. The project team is handing off to the operations team. So who's holding the ball at the particular moment?
I think as we think about the future, and I know there's a question on concessions later, so I'll hold that. But we are thinking about, besides just our regular concessions program, 2 kind of interesting programs. One is kind of I'll call it like a seasonal pop-up, where we could have businesses that aren't quite ready to take on the rigors, capital, and risk of being in the airport, but they could come in and get the experience of being in a location that we have built out already, and they would be there sort of seasonally. We haven't worked out all the details, so I don't want to put too much detail to it. That's definitely something we are going to do, and we're working with the project to build those spaces out at our cost and build a program around that. The other one, which we haven't, is the next step would be to have more of a market type thing, where not so much for food carts, because we have plenty of food concessions, but it could include some food, but it's really about retail, somebody who makes jewelry, or kind of like a my people's market concept in the airport, where we could give people exposure that would help their businesses. They're not really probably thinking about long-term residents in the airport. They could grow to that at some point, but that's even further afield from these seasonal pop-ups we're talking about, to people that would come in and work at the market, so to speak. So we're definitely thinking of the different levels of businesses and their ability and, to be permanent, but also like, how do we, back to the shared prosperity question, how do we spread that opportunity to other types of businesses and communities here in the Portland region that just can't come in and run food and beverage, 20 hours a day, every day of the year type business?
Well, thank you very much. I have the next question. It's a big shift in focus. We're going to talk about security now, and the community, of course, continues to be concerned about safety and security. Our port is critical to that. So last year we were here, we discussed 17 positions that were added for security at PDX. And a year later, we'd like to know, we noted that 10 of the new positions were intended to deal with increased crime and homelessness around the port's properties. Were these positions successful?
Thanks for the question. Takes a large part of my time. First, I'll just note that when we create positions in the budget, hiring lags from that, hiring and training. So let me talk a little bit about the positions we created and what we're doing, and some other steps we're taking that have monetary impact on the budget, and then I'll just mention on the effectiveness piece. So one of our big goals in that adding all those positions, several of them were out at the marine terminal for the container facility, which is working more and more, so we need more hours and more staff out there. But most of them were here at PDX. Of particular emphasis, there were a number of, I'll say, onesies and halves FTEs for communications dispatch, a police lieutenant, emergency manager, things like that as we staff up out of the pandemic. But a large part was to hire 6 police officers on a reimbursement agreement with TriMet to ride and help police the red line that comes into the airport. We have not deployed those officers yet. We are just now staffed up and about to deploy them in concert with TriMet, and that will certainly help with both crime and homelessness issues we're experiencing at PDX. We also created a intergovernmental affairs issues manager, right? The homeless issue and has a lot of jurisdictional questions around it and a lot of connectivity. So we really found ourselves needing somebody on more of the administrative side to work with other jurisdictions. And that has really been effective in prioritizing cleanups, service provision, and things like that, so that we're better aligned with the county and the city and other jurisdictions around us, including Metro. I'll add that we also are hiring, and we're just about to deploy in July. In fact, I just talked about it yesterday at a town hall, 2 behavioral health clinicians, right? And so we are going to have them available for dispatch with our police officers when they're called to certain types of calls. We experience a lot of people, especially in the homeless community, that are in mental health crisis, and we will have trained clinicians available to come with them to help connect with them and provide them connections to services. So we're super excited about that. We also hired a neighborhood district attorney out of the Multnomah County District Attorney's Office, who still works for the Multnomah County District Attorney, but is domiciled here at PDX and is really focused on PDX issues. And having the assistant district attorney here and having the additional staffing really from the budget before that we've hired and filled in our police is allowing us to do really targeted focus on crimes. And we're really talking about car theft, catalytic converter theft, and bag theft out of the airport, which are chronic problems for us. And certainly car and catalytic converter theft are regional issues. So we are seeing fruits of that. Our numbers are decreasing. Nobody likes having their car stolen. So when I tell them it's way better than the city, but it still doesn't assuage you when your car is stolen. So I think we're making good progress. We have a long way to go as a region in that, and certainly PDX has some more to do with that as well. So I feel like we're being very effective. These positions are making a difference. It's just allowing us to put more people out and really also target. The other key thing, just I'll mention on the DA, is repeat offenders are really the chronic problem, not the one-offs. And having the DA here who can connect with prosecution and follow through for people that are multiple times caught doing things is really helpful and a big push of ours right now.
Thank you.
I have a brief follow-up. In addition to car theft, bag theft, drug interdiction coming through the airport?
Yes, we do see that. That's usually at the federal checkpoint when we get called to that, right? The Transportation Security Administration finds that and calls our police to deal with that. Lots of people trying to take out marijuana to other states, right? And that's, you can't do that through the federal checkpoint. Not so much incoming or on the international side, but domestically, drugs going out is definitely a thing. We're also super focused on human trafficking, which we definitely see, all airports see, and that's a big focus as well.
I have the next question. We want to talk about, we saw that the wooden ceiling's been completed, a great demonstration of mass timber, and the terminal core redevelopment is nearing completion. Can you just give us an update on what projects are coming up next at PDX?
Yes, I can.
Okay.
And if you want to talk specifically about the Terminal Core project, Vince is much better suited to talk about that as he's leading that effort. But I will note that we still have 2.5 years left. It's a long way to go, but relatively speaking, we've come through most of it. With the term westward expansion opening next May and then completion of the project at the end of 25. But really thinking about the future, we're in the process right now of two kind of very important things. The first is we're developing a new 10-year capital program. We do it on a 10-year cycle. We work with the finance team to set targets, financial targets for our capital program. And then we think about all of our needs, both on airside, land side of the airport, and then the terminal infrastructure itself. Concurrently with that, we are starting to kick off a new master plan for PDX. The last one we did was in 2011. Usually we do it every 10 years, but because we had the PDX Next program, we delayed that. That will really guide development of the airport. I expect it to, on the terminal side, focus on maybe Concourse D and opportunities out there for greater capacity, and the ongoing capital of airfield work. It's a super capital intensive business. So those two things are going. In addition to that, the Terminal Core project is massive, but it will not do everything. There will be follow-on projects associated with building out a conference center or dealing with a maintenance issue that we didn't tackle in that. A lot of asset management type work going forward. And that's really what we're probably focused on over the next 3 to 5 years. That said, there are two pretty big projects hanging out there that we're looking to figure out how to fund. One of them is the interchange of 82nd and Airport Way. That will continue to get congested with traffic going through it. That is our responsibility. It's our interchange. And of course, light rail goes through that, so it complicates that interchange quite a bit. The second is, and we'll talk a little bit more later on our resilience program, we're super focused on making a large portion of one of our runways resilient to a Cascadia subduction zone earthquake, because that is, we think, the highest thing that the community is going to need immediately after an event to allow people to come in and people to go out, right, and goods and services. So those two things are top of mind for us on kind of big projects, thinking about regional cooperation and also funding sources, both from federal, state, and local opportunities.
Great. And last year we talked quite a bit about supply chain and inflation, particularly related to the terminal core. Can you just give us an update on those things? Every time I walk through the airport, I think about the cost of drywall after this, it's my favorite statistic to quote to anybody I'm in the airport with. So can you just give us kind of a little latest on how those impacts are being felt at the airport?
Sure, and I'll talk more specifically just about Terminal Core. And we got that project fully bid out last fall. We did just a little bit more in January, but for the most part, the inflation, it was a tough time, right, to be out in the market, but that risk has, I would say, ended for us on the Terminal Core project, right? So we have all the materials procured under contract and pricing. Supply chain is still a bit of an issue. Fortunately, we have still enough lead time, so there isn't anything that we're overly concerned about at this point. A lot of the tech stuff is the most important parts. So a lot of video monitors, video walls, all of that is the stuff that is the biggest concern. But we worry constantly. It's what we do. So do I believe we're going to have it all in place by the time May opens up next year? Yeah, well, we will, but we don't have it all like on site today. So it's a normal amount of risk at this point.
Great, thank you.
I was just going to add that based on our experience with the Terminal Core project, when we're developing our CIP, we're really thinking about inflation and supply chain. So the way we do estimating has changed, and we're being a lot more conservative because we don't know about the future. And the good news is on other projects, they're coming in about where we thought they would when we kind of re-rack them in terms of today's climate, in terms of escalation, skilled labor, and supply chain. So we feel like we're in good shape, but it's something we're just going to tackle moving forward.
I'm going to short circuit our question on concessions since we've already had an introduction. We hear you're linked to regional prosperity. We heard that it was a difficult process for some of your applicants, so there's some barriers there. We know that there was robust competition for those spots. So I'm going to kind of just leave those on the table as facts and just ask you, what we also heard that some of these plans don't quite work out for vendors as they had anticipated, and so it's not as long-term a proposition as they had originally planned. So the question is, do you have vendors queued up and waiting for the next opening or the next round of concessionaire selection?
Well, you're really making this easy for me by shortening it up.
You need a breath here.
I know. This last round where we brought in, we awarded 21 concessions, really covers both phase 1, which is the opening of the westward expansion of the terminal core, and phase 2, which is the completion of the terminal core project at the end of 25. So the only thing left for us right now that's on our horizon are 4 news and gift locations, and we'll submit put an RFP out for that next year. Other than that, it's a pretty stable program for quite a while then. We'll be super busy trying to get those 21 concessioners open and up and running as we finish the project. So I think I'll just mention, you asked, we were really pleased with the amount of response we got, especially in the kind of business climate today. And I think we're very proud of the fact that, number one, all 21 of these are local or regional businesses, and 10 of them are either women or minority, partially or fully owned businesses. So we feel really good about that. So we had great response, but it takes a lot of work to get out there into the community and make sure people understand the opportunity and the risks associated with it. And I'm sorry, you want to skip over barriers to entry, but I'm so proud of the team and the work the port did, where we eliminated a lot of those barriers this time by putting out a new kind of easy to follow guide on how to apply. We eliminated architectural drawings, which are very expensive and unnecessary early on just to get concepts. And I think we had great success in reaching a group of businesses that would have looked at a 30-page government document and said, I don't understand this and I don't have time for it. So we're certainly proud of that work.
Well, I think you were successful on that point because the business coverage on the selection was very positive.
And it's really cool to see. I mean, it's always such a pleasure to come back to PDX from some other airport and just see like this, feels like an extension of the city and the region. As just a brief, I hope, follow up on that, Curtis talked earlier about all of the, partnerships to try to help folks be successful, business partners. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit about, it seems like it's great. It sounds like great work to get a robust pool of applicants and to get people through that process. And then does the port continue to kind of provide structure to help those businesses, some of whom, have not operated in this challenging environment before, be successful as port concession or as PDX concessionaires?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. And yes, we have a full team that keeps engaged with our concessionaires. We also help with promotions. We understand, we have data on when they're working well and when they're not, and what food items they're selling and not. So we work with them to try to mentor them. Some accept help a little more readily than others. Some need help more than others. But I think that partnership is very important. Their success is our success. And we don't just, lease them the space and walk away and count the money. Just as you said, our customers love PDX. And so we want them to be successful. And the brands we choose and the variety is really driven by the customers. And so how the businesses do, but also how they treat their employees and how their employees do is very important to us. So we stay engaged with that full time.
Thanks so much. So, CFO Antoinette Chandler was selected as 2023 Executive of the Year by the Portland Business Journal. Congratulations. In the Business Journal article, you mentioned one of the biggest challenges of the year was managing through the Great Resignation and all of the changes in staffing. Could you talk to us a little bit about staffing challenges, opportunities at the port, and if you're now seeing kind of less turnover and just kind of where your current vacancy rates sit?
Yeah, I'll just make a couple of comments, quick comments, but I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Bobby Stedman, to give you some of the specifics. And you're absolutely right. One of the biggest challenges was just thinking through just all the stress that people went through for the pandemic and what impact that had on their decision making around if they wanted to stay in the workforce or not. And also the impact that it had, I think, on working mothers. Who had to make that decision. And I don't think the port was the only organization out there that had a workforce that was grappling with that. So we certainly did see our fair share. Bobby will give you the numbers there. I would say just managing through that turnover, looking at the impact that our employees have on the organization, and also trying to work through some of the financial challenges. All of that happening simultaneously really made, for some complex problems that we had to work through. But I'm really proud of the port. I'm proud of our employees who really stayed focused. They stayed resilient. They worked through it, shifting through again from a fully in-person environment to a remote environment to now we're in this hybrid environment. And I think we're really on the right trajectory in terms of how to balance that new work-life balance that we have. But it was a challenge, but again, we were resilient and we worked through it and managed through that turnover. So with that, I'll turn it over to Bobby so she can provide some numbers and some additional commentary.
Thanks, Antoinette. Prior to the pandemic, we were operating at a vacancy rate of around 5%, and we're currently around 9%. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the average right now nationally is around 6.1%. So we're a little higher than the average. I will say that in terms of our turnover is decreasing. We were at 14% prior to the pandemic. We're 14% now. In the middle, we were around 16%. So we see the turnover, again, those numbers slowly decreasing. I think part of the challenge that we're having coming out of the pandemic and the social unrest in terms of our vacancy rate has impacted our ability to hire first responders. So we've added some staff within the police department. We're also having more of a challenge in finding qualified officers. So we've put some incentives in place, as many other jurisdictions are having to do as well. So we are experiencing some benefit from putting in those incentives. I will say that, as Antoinette pointed out, we also, just like other employers, were suffering through the mass resignation, and we did some layoffs right around the same time. We did some layoffs to manage costs, and then we were hit with people leaving, and so we didn't necessarily have the resources to rehire people quite quickly enough, but. The executive team approved 2 additional resources in the recruitment staff so that we could pick up the pace on the recruitments, and that really, we've seen the fruits of that labor. Again, some of the challenges we still have are in police, fire, and some of the technical related jobs, because they're either the labor force is few and the demand is high. So we're still experiencing some of that, but we have every expectation and we'll come out of that shortly.
It wouldn't be a hearing if we didn't talk about Superfund and the cleanup of the harbor. I mean, the port every year seems champing at the bit. When are we going to get a decision? When are things going to get going? We appreciate and respect your leadership on this issue. Last year, you were hopeful. You were hopeful that by early 2024, we would see some policy and practical movement on the design issues that would let you get started. So, what do we hear this year?
Well, thanks for the question. Although I'd rather talk about shared prosperity and Antoinette's award and concessions or something like that.
Well, there might be room for that in this project if things ever got going.
That's right. The short answer really is that it is taking a little bit longer when you look at the river as a whole. There are 15 sub areas in the river that are being addressed, and so they're all on their own timeline. These projects require EPA to be involved, and so in some instances there's some delay because of unavailability of EPA staff. Sometimes it's coordination of the parties, but they're all under an order to be designed. So that's the good news, is that EPA played their hand, I guess, in an effective way to get parties to the table to do the design. Cleanup is the next stage, but the design is underway. The port's specific involvement is we are committed to doing the design at Terminal 4, and which we own, and at Willamette Cove. At Willamette Cove, we're partnering with the city and the state to accomplish that. In terms of other things that we're involved with on an ongoing basis, one is the allocation process, which is it's a voluntary mediation process to try to determine who's responsible for what. That's kind of a parallel process to EPA's pressure, is the parties trying to agree on who's going to be responsible for what. We've been a partner in that in the 15 years that it's been going, and are hopeful that it will be effective. The other thing that we've been involved with for about 5 years now is sort of a fish consumption warning system in Multnomah County. Multnomah County Environmental Health administers the program, but it's designed to get signs up so that people that do fish in the Willamette, in the Superfund area, are aware of the risk and encouraged not to overconsume fish. We're talking about the resident fish, such as bass or carp, not the migratory fish, not salmon and trout. Those are safe to eat. But these communities, often minority communities that are active fish consumers, there's just a health concern about that. So the port has been part of the solution there.
Are those signs? What languages are those signs in?
They're in 4 different languages. I think it's. Do you know what they are? I think it's Russian, Vietnamese, and maybe there's a 4th one. But yeah, the intent is to target the communities that are actually accessing the river in that way on a regular basis.
I find it interesting, and no disrespect to your profession, but the cleanup questions always go to the lawyers. I was at Metro, and clearly getting the agreement of the parties who all want to keep their hands literally clean from the financial costs has been a substantial obstacle to getting things moving along. Do you see any relief in that? I mean, in that area, or do you see the parties more ready to move on?
I think we had this question come up with our commissioners yesterday, and the woman Jessica Hamilton that leads this area, she was expressing some optimism that when the parties came to the table and agreed to design 100% design the remedy, they're putting real money on the table, right? They are investing. So I think. And again, EPA has some tools to bring people to the table, but I think that's a sign that things are going to continue to move. They'll be the next couple of years, the design will be complete. Then the next step will be agreeing with EPA on who's going to actually perform it, who's going to pay for it, and that's all coming. So,
great, Thank you. I assume this is going to stay on our question list, and we'll look forward to the day when it moves from the lawyers answering the questions to the engineers.
That's right. It'll be a construction project at that point. That's right.
So we're going to move to greenhouse gas emissions. And we congratulate you on your goal to reduce 80% of greenhouse gas emissions by 2040. Can you tell us what changes will need to be made in order to achieve that goal? And how are these changes balanced against other priorities like shared prosperity?
Thank you for the question. I'll just note, first of all, that environmental sustainability is one of the key pillars of shared prosperity, because environmental impacts often hit disproportionately to Black, Indigenous, people of color, and low-income communities. So when we think about our environmental program, we really think about environmental justice and how that impacts our community. So it's really part of shared prosperity in the context that we talked about before. And our new goals, I think, are also recognizing and that we are trying to achieve these goals without the use of renewable energy credits or carbon offsets, right? So we're taking those out as, it's easy to say, oh, I paid somebody some money and I checked the box. So that's certainly not our goal. I think for us, we're really focused on the largest issues in front of us for where we have impact on that. And I'll mention a couple of those. Really, we do it through both innovation, tracking our emissions, and really electrification in the long run, and then using renewable energy for that electrification. I know your next question, right? But there's a real co-benefit on environmental sustainability along with resilience and climate change adaptability. So we think about these things all as one kind of large program for us. Some of the examples we're doing, like in design in the Terminal Core project, and all of our PDX Next programs, right, we're targeting a LEED Gold standard on design for energy efficiency and passive solar. The Terminal Core project itself is installing a really massive ground source heating system that's going to cut the energy use intensity of the terminal in half while we double the size of the terminal, and that's a really exciting project. Another big issue for us is sustainable aviation fuel. And getting where do we get a sustainable aviation fuel from, and how do we get it to the airlines to use? So we are joined with the airports in Seattle and Vancouver, and we call it the Joint Cascadia Airports Collaboration. And we're really trying to figure out how to get regional production of sustainable aviation fuel, right? It's a proven technology, but it's not produced in large scale, and it's hard to get to market. As Curtis talked about us being at the end of a spoke for air service, we're also at the end of the spoke for fuel distribution here in Portland. So it's in our interest to collaborate with Seattle and Vancouver, particularly Seattle, because there's refining capacity in the Seattle area. So how do we incent them to create sustainable aviation fuel, and how do we get it down to Portland through the pipeline and into our tanks so the airlines can use it? So that's a big effort of ours. And innovation, when I think about innovation, some of the things, our buses right now for all the parking products run on renewable natural gas. And we're looking at hydrogen cells, right, which are emission free. Is that where we need to go with that? So looking at our main sources, right, it's really the value add, not the shiny stuff. It's where can you make a big impact. Again, one of the projects in the PDX Next program in the P3 garage, Vince and his team used a carbon capture technique for concrete, and that sequestered about 550 metric tons of carbon. So we're trying those innovative techniques as well. It's the first time I think it's been used in the area at scale, and we're hoping other people will use it also. So that innovation is a key point. I think the last one to just talk about a little bit is electrification, right? Everybody wants to electrify everything, but you have to have the infrastructure to do that. And so we had a project we're executing now through the project. It's a new feed from the Kennedy substation into the airport. So we can power a lot of this. We're participating in a community solar project on our property that will put a megawatt of renewable energy back into the grid, and we will buy some of that, of course. And then as part of the electrification, as we're putting in the backbone in the terminal itself for all of our the airline's ground service equipment, right? When you're sitting on the plane and you look out of the window, the little tug that's dragging the plane away from the gate, the baggage handling carts, all that stuff, that's all diesel. And that's really one of our big emission that we have some control over, even though it's not our equipment. So we're on a path now to put in that backbone infrastructure and charging stations and move the airlines onto electrified equipment. So those are kind of the big areas I think we're working on right now in that.
And then as you add them all up and you look down the future pipeline, you see that in 2040, these are all going to line up and you'll be at 80% reduction.
Well, that's certainly our goal. There's going to be new technology that comes on. Electric aircraft are coming on for short haul, those kind of things. There's a lot going on. So if we don't have a goal, we won't reach it. So
I do think also it's been really encouraging. A lot of the districts that we speak with, the first thing is the parts that you specifically control. And I certainly remember earlier in my hearing schedule, hearing the port say, we're going to do these things that will cut our internal energy usage. But it's really encouraging to hear that you're trying to, think more broadly about how you can also influence, because the majority of the carbon coming out of the port is not from equipment that the port owns. So really great to hear that you all are trying to be proactive about how to push your partners to also decrease their emissions.
Yeah, I have the last question. Continuing the conversation around climate change, we're all experiencing more frequent, more severe weather issues here and around the world. And we know the port obviously doesn't own that problem and doing good work around reducing greenhouse emissions. But can you talk to us a little bit about the planning the port's doing to kind of mitigate or manage forward the frequency of snow, flooding, wildfire smoke, all of those issues that we're facing more and more?
And I have the last question as well.
Okay.
So it's a great question, and it's something, I would say, anecdotally we're seeing, right? And I think all of us who live in this region see it. We actually are in partnership with Multnomah County and the Oregon Emergency Management Department and have submitted to them kind of our identification of where we're susceptible to climate change, what those risks and hazards are, what our planned mitigation strategies are, and how we're going to implement that. And just to give you kind of a high level for that, and there's a real connectivity to seismic resilience here as well, but it's not specifically to climate change, but I'll speak about both of them. One of the first kind of thoughts we have is how do we harden our infrastructure and our systems to survive smoke, snow and ice, all those kinds of things. Heat on the runway, right, affects performance, all those things. We're thinking about design and any projects that we do when we touch something, we're asking ourselves, does this piece of equipment, does this infrastructure require changing, or do our systems require changing for being able to communicate when we don't have wires connected, for lack of a better term, right, things like that. The second is to really upgrade our response plans. We're really investing in our staff and emergency management. And when we think about emergency management, well, I can list a whole host of man-made emergencies we're dealing with. We're also thinking about that in the context of climate change and weather events. So we're staffing and doing those as well. We're improving our communications platforms. One of the things we really learned in this last winter, we had two pretty significant snow and ice events that are very unusual for us. We occasionally see one of those every couple of years, but now we're seeing two a year. So one of the things we really learned was that our protocols for communicating with our business partners and our customers were a little antiquated for the scale and severity of the events we're having. So we're changing kind of that as well, just thinking about how we coordinate and communicate with all those different parties at the airport in particular. And then finally, we're really thinking about our people and their equipment that they're using, right? The PPE we have, there's a lot of certainly new rules from OSHA on heat index and things like that. But, we think about, do we are providing shade for our employees? How are we notifying the whole airport when we hit the OSHA index for 80 degrees and 90 degrees? Do they have the right PPE with them? if they, sometimes essential employees, we're asking them to go into, situations that aren't that great. They need a respirator, not just a mask, right? Do we have all that, and are we doing it? And then if you were here for commission, you saw a consent item where we're buying specific snow and ice equipment to clear the airfield. In the past, we've always relied on using the summer dump truck for construction and slapping a plow on it. We can't get away with that anymore. The events are too severe, so we're upgrading our equipment and our training for our staff to actually handle these things as they go forward.
Thank you.
I have a
Go
follow-up.
ahead, Margot.
One of the things that's interesting to us is because we deal with all of the districts here, many of which we hold public hearings for. And so we see the connection between when you talk about hiring more police officers. We were talking to the city about that yesterday. And I'm interested that I would not have expected some time ago to hear about behavioral health specialist as an airport or port employee consideration. So in terms of our partner districts and resilience, I retired 10 years ago, and I was in this room at Levy Ready meetings when I was at Metro. We also have the Urban Flood District as one of our newer districts. When you talked about climate issues, we did not talk about flooding and the river beyond cleanup. What is your involvement with urban flood, and are you concerned about the resiliency of the levees?
Yeah, why don't I take that? In short, we're obviously deeply connected to it across several of the pens along the river here, and have been involved since the creation of the district on the board. And we have two staff that are very active in the conversations. We've been very supportive of the work that they've done to essentially advance the funding conversation. We think that's a smart path to be on, essentially to share the burden a little more broadly for who benefits from the presence of the berm, essentially. We are, I want to say we're the largest in 2 of the 4 units at the airport primarily, but industrial property as well. So I would say worried about it. Concerned maybe is a better word. We do have to do the work to upgrade per the federal standard the length of the wall. And we are seeing things that we haven't seen before, including people digging into the wall, the sort of homeless populations leveling ground. We have our own issues out at 33rd. We're just seeing a lot of things that 10 years ago we wouldn't have imagined. And the behavioral health one is trying to have an appropriate response and to maintain the professionalism of our police force, but also bring the tools that are required and not ask our police to do things that are really not in their remit. It's been challenging, and I would say I'm grateful to our both our police and fire. We have parking control representatives who are dealing with situations that 5 or 8 years ago we didn't think they'd have to. So I guess in both those categories, we're trying to respond. Our preference is to engage with partners rather than go it alone. In the case of the behavioral health, that is bringing professionals in who can help our professional staff do that work, but also engage with the community on, what do we do to address these concerns that are bigger than just the port. And, again, I would say they're new waters for us. We're just trying to figure out as we go. And I would say also operating with the support of our commission to do things that need to get done and to be transparent about how we're thinking about them. We just actually yesterday, the all-employee meeting that Katie and Dan both mentioned, our police force has really led the way on body-worn cameras. And I just view it as another of those things that could be super controversial, but if you engage transparently with the professionals to say, this is where we want to get to, our team has done a great job in that space as well. I sort of view them all in the same category as how do you engage in these new things in an open, transparent way as a public agency. I'd say it's gone pretty well.
Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. I want to thank everybody for their contributions to today's discussion. I think we've watched the evolution of your new mission and all of that, and I think it's safe to say that you don't just talk the talk, you walk the walk. It's nice to hear and see specific actions around equity, around climate change and sustainability. We really see kind of the port being a leader in the region on those issues and how to demonstrably make it happen within the agency. So with that,
Public comment.
oh yeah, that's right. Thank you. Good job. Oh, how could, what would we have done if I had hit the gavel? I will provide an opportunity for public comment should anyone have joined us in the room or online.
I'm looking out and I don't see anyone. No one has emailed or contacted us online either. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, here we go. I'll officially close the hearing and open a regular business meeting of the TSCC. Commissioners, do you have any additional comments on the budget? Great. Allegra, will you please provide the recommendations for staff for the certification letter?
Yes, and I would like to start by saying it's just been, as always, such a pleasure working with Port staff throughout the budget process. They've been quick to respond to any questions, and throughout the year, they collaborate with us when budget questions arise. We just so appreciate that check-in to say, we think we know the answer, but we just want the confirmation. Like, it's great to check in before. So for the fiscal year 23-24 approved budget, TSCC staff found the budget estimates to be reasonable for the purposes stated. For the certification letter, we do have one recommendation related to expenditures exceeding appropriations in prior budget years. We had this last year's recommendation as well. We noticed it's a reoccurring challenge, and we're offering a recommendation for the district to implement enhanced policies to mitigate these issues going forward. Port staff and TSCC staff have already coordinated on these issues. In fact, we have received a written letter that includes a specific plan for addressing this issue going forward. So they're already at work for that recommendation. That's our one recommendation, and we have no objections to the fiscal year 22-23 budget.
Great, thank you. May I have a motion authorizing the commission to sign the certification letter as recommended by staff?
I'll move.
Thanks, James.
And I'll second.
Thanks, Margot. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. The Port of Portland's budget is so certified by TSCC. Allegra will provide the certification letter shortly, and 1 minute to spare will adjourn the meeting, keeping our record alive.
Thank you.